Thank you, South by EDU community, for helping me give a warm South by Southwest EDU welcome to Temple Grandin.
Well, one of the things we need to be doing is we got to keep Austin weird. That's the first thing we got to do. I think I want to start off showing the title slide because, yeah, autism is an important part of my life. But the other big important part of my life is I'm a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. And half the cattle in this country, when they go to a meatpacking plant, are handled in equipment I designed. And I think I'm doing pretty well for somebody that when I was a little kid, they thought I was mentally retarded. You know, we want to help students to be everything that they can be. Now, I want to get you to think about different ways that people think. You know, I think in pictures, and I used to think that everybody thought in pictures the way I did. Well, it was interesting to learn that that's not the case. And maybe before I go on, half the people in Silicon Valley are a little bit on the autism spectrum. And I worked with people building big meatpacking plants, great millwrights and welders that I think were a little bit on the spectrum. You see, a little bit of autism gives you that quirky, different kind of guy that's often really smart. More autistic traits, you can get into very severe handicaps. It's a very, very big continuum. And I'm seeing too many quirky kids. I think some of them getting a label, maybe they shouldn't be getting a label. And they're getting addicted to video games. I know we're here for technology. But I've been seeing some very bad things with video game addiction, and they are not having a good outcome. Too many of them are ending up on Social Security disability. Then I go over to the meatpacking plant, and there's a whole shop full of old gray-haired hippies that are my age, and they run the maintenance shop. And I think the younger version of those hippies would be diagnosed on the autism spectrum, or maybe dyslexic, or maybe ADHD. I want to see them get those good jobs. Now, there's a lot of conflicts out there in the world. The techies can't stand the suits. And I think one of the reasons for that is different ways that people think. People in the field can't stand the academics. One of the things I've tried to do during my whole career is bridge the gap between the field, feedlots, cattle, and academic research. It's not always easy. Sometimes scientists fight over that the only way you can have science is a controlled experiment. And a lot of my work has been observation. Observation is part of science. We just learned that Einstein was right about gravity waves. That basically was observation. And then you have the artists and the accountants never got along. Yes, it's tax season. I've got to get along with the accountant because I need her very, very much. And then in my field behavior, the field behavior people versus more the in the lab type. Yes, observation is part of science. Astronomy is observation. What is the control for the Hubble Space Telescope? Do we point it at the ground for the control? And I think maybe it maybe did have a control because maybe it was the spy satellite before it was the Hubble. Okay, when I learned that visual thinking was different than verbal thinking, it gave me a lot of insight into problem solving. And I've been thinking about ways that different kinds of minds can work together. You know, let's take something like the iPhone. Steve Jobs was an artist, and he was fascinated with calligraphy. That's why computers have pretty fonts. He was not a mathematician. He was not a programmer. Engineers had to make the inside of the phone work. That's an example of different kinds of minds. This is one of my most important slides, the different kinds of minds. In my book, Thinking in Pictures, I discussed how I was an object visualizer. I think in pictures. Everything I think about is a picture. If I don't have a picture, I don't have thought. Couldn't do algebra. Well, I should have been jumped to geometry. I am seeing really stupid things. I went to New Jersey, and I'm really going to bash this community college. Now, on the whole, community colleges are doing a great job, but this particular community college, and I'll leave its name out, would not allow a student to take a biology class because she hadn't passed algebra. I got straight A's in biology. I'm seeing too many smart visual thinkers screened out by this algebra requirement. They should go right straight to geometry, absolutely straight to geometry. Because geometry's got more visual thinking. Because if you go on Google Images and you type in math keywords on Google Images, geometry, I get fabulous visual web pages. I type in trigonometry, fabulous web pages. Even calculus, 20% of the web pages have an image. Algebra, it's nothing. Nothing there to visualize. So how did I manage to get through college? Because in 1967, the required class, the national fad, was finite math. That was matrices, probability, and statistics. Now, another kind of mind is a pattern thinker. This is your mathematician. This is your Silicon Valley scientist. This is the little kid that's really good with Legos, really good with patterns. Sometimes these kids have trouble with reading. Then you got the guy that's into verbal facts, very, very linear, knows everything about his favorite subject. And then some kids are auditory thinkers. They learn best with their ears. Now, that's definitely not me. Now, what are some of the characteristics of being a visual thinker? It's bottom up. Concepts are formed by putting specific examples into categories. So my concept of what a dog is, for example, is based on lots and lots of different kinds of dogs. And when I was a little tiny kid, I sorted cats and dogs by size. And then our neighbors got a dachshund. I could no longer sort dogs by size. So then I had to find another sensory-based feature to sort the dogs by. How about barking, or their smell, or the shape of their nose? Visual thinkers notice details. It's sensory-based, not word-based. It's also associative thinking. And there is some new research now that shows there's certain types of creativity that are associated with the milder forms of autism. If we got rid of all of the autistic genetics, you better like your computer really well because you won't get another one. It's just that simple. But the language-based thinkers get hung up on the words. But you see, I don't. I go out to Silicon Valley, and I see a programmer in his mid-20s. Yep, really geeky, socially awkward. Then I go to an autism meeting, and here a 16-year-old walks up to me, 10 years younger. They're the same geek. And one of these geeks is headed to a great job, and the other one's going to end up playing video games in the basement on a Social Security check, and they're the same geek. And that drives me absolutely crazy. Now, being a visual thinker really helped me in my work with livestock, because I noticed that cattle noticed little visual details out there in the facility. Like I can see a car through the fence. They'd see the reflection on a car, and they'd stop. Or they'd see a coat on a fence. Or there'd be a hose on the ground. Or reflection. Or seeing people moving. They notice details. All right, let's see how good you are at visual thinking. How many people saw that animal is staring at the sunbeam? Raise your hand. Oh, we're doing better than a lot of places. That's really good. Notice visual details. And look at how the horse and the zebra have an ear on each other. I try to explain to students in animal science and veterinary science. Observe the animal. What is it looking at? What is it sensing? Now, I'm not going to show you any meatpacking plant slides. If you want to see how meatpacking plant works, I've got great videos online. Beef plant video tour with Temple Grandin, pork plant video tour with Temple Grandin, and it's going to show how all this stuff works. And I've worked on construction projects for every single one of the major meat companies, have worked on that. And I've noticed a very kind of interesting but kind of disturbing thing involving technology. I've been in this industry for 40 years. I've worked for Cargill, Tyson, you name them, I've worked for them. Drawing drawings and supervising steel and concrete construction work. So, of course, I learned drafting, the old-fashioned way. And I've got a good example of that I'm going to show you. And then I watched the industry in the 90s switch over from hand drafting to electronic drafting. The old folks did just fine. But I noticed a disturbing trait with the young ones, like a young 22-year-old kid took a class in a community college in drafting. And I started getting strange drawings with weird perceptual mistakes from every single major company. And the mistakes were things like the center of the circle's not in the center of the circle. So when I saw these mistakes, I'd call up the draftsman and I'd kind of get his demographic, found out he'd never built anything, never done anything with his hands, never done anything with his hands, and he'd never drawn by hand. You gotta touch to perceive. And the drawings today I'm getting, I just got a drawing recently from a major company, not going to name it, but all the gates were left out. Well, they just assumed the equipment company would know where to put the gates in. That's probably a bad idea. But people have got to touch. I visited Pixar, and they told me that sometimes they got to get the people off the computers and have them draw. Now, if you use a 3D printer, then you get it back to the real world, and then you can touch the thing that you print. And at another animation company, they'd print out all the little character statues and put them by the mouse pad where they could touch. If you don't touch, you don't perceive. And I've seen some things, apps and stuff you can get where you do all your shapes online. I go, you need to touch the triangle. You need to draw the pentagon. You need to actually touch these things. And in my book, The Autistic Brain, which unfortunately the bookstores run out of, but I do have one sample copy I held back, and I'm going to sign book plates. But in the Autistic Brain book, I describe all the research that shows that these different kinds of minds actually exist. I have evidence-based. It's in my book, The Autistic Brain. Okay, Barnes & Noble and Amazon both have it. Hope you order it from there. Now, let's show you how an animal can be very specific. A man on a horse and a man on the ground is a different picture. And so it's important to train cattle that both are okay. Because if cattle have just been handled by a man on a horse, they freak out and panic when they're confronted with their first man on foot. And then the other big question I get asked is, do the cattle know they're going to get slaughtered? I have found they behave the same way in both places. And I've got lots of papers online on Grandin.com. I've got lots of stuff in the Google Scholar on these things that you can look up. Okay, here is one of my facilities. And I found that when I was training, I have a person named Mark who works for me. And before he did any CAD drafting, he actually built a cattle handling facility in my backyard. And I had him do a year on the hand drafting board. Then we did the CAD. And he draws beautiful electronic drawings. But that's not what I'm seeing out of a good number of people. Okay, then I'm getting asked to make some simpler little layouts. This is a simple little sketch drawing. Later on, I'm going to show you something fancier. But this takes advantage of the behavioral principle to go back to where the animals come from. I think in education, we've got to start working more on building up the kids' strengths. Kids that get labels, mild autism, Asperger's, dyslexia, learning problems, this and that, ODD, whatever you want to put on them, often have uneven skills. Good at one thing, bad at something else. We need to get a lot more emphasis on building up the thing they are good at, the thing they can turn into a career. And when I was a little kid, my ability in drawing was always encouraged, and I was encouraged to do lots of different things. So how does association thinking work? Okay, give me a key word, shoes. So I see these horrid little shoes I had when I was a child, and I had to sit through church, even though I thought it was boring. And now I'm getting some more better childhood memories of shoes I wore. It makes me happy that those are back in fashion today. Or how about those? And they're back in fashion. And then how do I get to this Ariat boot? And then I get to what the Ariat boot steps in. And I'm not going to show you the dog poo that it stepped in a really large hospital recently. And I gave a talk. Not going to show you that. But you can see how it's associative. But there is a logic to the associative thinking. All right, here's your evidence. There's a great scientist named Huff, I can never pronounce that right. Also, Angelica Mazzard, an Italian scientist on brain scan studies, showing that there is two different kinds of visual thinking, pictorial object and pattern. Now, in the brain, there are circuits for what is something. All right, that's my kind of thinking. The mathematician, pattern thinker, has overactive circuits in the where is something. Where am I located in space, something. All right, now I just got to show off some of my drawings. That's one of my hand drawings right there. And when you're a weird geek, how do you sell yourself? You sell yourself by showing off your work. I sold myself to clients by showing them the things that I could do. So even though it was weird, when I whipped that out and I showed them, they went, wow, you did that. Now, one of the things that a lot of kids that are different have got to learn is working skills. When I was 13, Mother had me in a sewing job that she set up in the neighborhood. When I was 15, I went out to my aunt's ranch, and I was afraid to go. She gave me a choice. I could go for a week, and if I hated it, come home or stay all summer. I stayed all summer. I absolutely loved it. But if I hadn't gone, I wouldn't have been in the cattle industry. And then I cleaned 8 horse stalls every day. I did a lot of work experience, and I'm seeing too many smart verbal kids getting locked into the label. Okay, autism now is a spectrum that goes from Silicon Valley to somebody who can't dress themselves. And I'm finding a lot of language-based thinkers get trapped in the label. I look at the kid. How good does he talk? Show me stuff he does. Okay, I got a really big circuit in my head for visual thinking. And there's another view of it there, really big, all the way back to the primary graphics files. Now that's a circuit for speak what you see. The fiber bundles goes from the graphic files up to the language area. That's a normal one. And there's mine. I got a whole lot of extra pushes there. And they go all over the brain, give me a keyword, I get pictures. I work like Google for images. And when search engines first were being invented, I can remember when the early Google and some of the other search engines came out, I go, wow, this works exactly how my mind works. You know why it works that way? Because somebody with some autism genetics made it, that's why. You see, it's a continuous trait. Autism is a continuous trait. When it's geeky and nerdy, become a label. All right, but I paid a price. If you count the fibers, I have less bandwidth for speak what you see. And so it ended up that I had a speech delay. Fortunately, I got into really good early intervention. Super important that that happened. Now, here's the wrecked math department. Maybe I can show you on this computer right there, right down here. I've got the arrow. It's all full of water, trashed out working memory. See, this is where I'm really good. Anything that requires long-term memory. I have to do workarounds on working memory. Now, you got kids that got this problem. Do not burden them with long strings of verbal information. They cannot do it. You must give them a pilot's checklist of the steps. Boom, 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 boom. Like bullet points on a checklist. If you don't know what a pilot's checklist is, you can look it up online. There's a lot of them there. Well, some kids could learn programming. Fortran for me was a disaster. In fact, I need to go try out the Scratch programming now for kids. Maybe I could do that. But Fortran, it was just too abstract for me. But Bill Gates had access to this same computer at the same time I did, 1968. And he could do it. Now, this brings up the really important thing of exposing kids to things. I got interested in the cattle industry because I was exposed to it when I was 15. And Bill Gates got exposed to programming. If he hadn't been exposed to it, he probably wouldn't have done it. And when I do talks at a lot of meetings, with special education departments, they don't really think about this. So I always show them all the things you can get free online, like SketchUp. I talk to a lot of low-income groups. And there's a lot of free stuff online. Khan Academy, SketchUp. Take advantage of these things. All right, here's the mind of the pattern thinker, the mathematician. This is not my mind. This praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No cuts, no tape. And the background shows the folding pattern. That's definitely not my mind. There's no way I could do that. And there are some great little origami stars that some kids did. And there are some really great origami things that pattern thinkers did. There's all kinds of wonderful pattern thinking things. There's a thing called fractiles. In fact, I was looking at it yesterday before I got on the plane. I want to make sure I mentioned that. Their actual thing that you actually touch, and you can make all different kinds of patterns with it. Now, when I asked a professor of astrophysics to think about a church steeple, instead of getting lots of specific images the way I do, he saw motion of people singing and praying. I go, wow, trippy. This certainly is not my mind. And I don't think this guy would have liked it if I'd said that I thought he was on the spectrum. And then I watched Big Bang Theory, and Sheldon says, I don't have Asperger's. Bull, Sheldon. Bull. There's different ways you can teach math. The more verbal way or the more visual spatial way. People get too hung up on just certain ways of teaching. What's important is the end result. I've worked in the construction trades. What's important is making a job that actually works. Some of these kids can't tell you how they do it. They just do it. They don't think like you do. All right, here's another new study showing that I'm not full of it. on talking about the different kinds of minds. Okay, new ways to look at thinking, associational versus linear. But we need both kinds of minds. On many of my books, I have a co-author because I need that for the structure, because I tend to be too much all over the place. Pictures and patterns versus words, bottom up versus top down. Top down thinking, word thinking, tends to get way too vague. You know, teachers will say to me, what do I do about an autistic kid in my classroom? Or someone with a dog behavior problem goes, what do I do with my crazy dog? Well, I don't know what you do with either one of them because I don't have enough information. When you think in words, you tend to grossly overgeneralize. Okay, if it's a 3-year-old that's not talking, I can give you a standard answer. But once the kids get older, I got to know a lot more about this kid. How old is he? Can he talk? What's going on in the classroom? I don't even know what's going on. I can't answer it. And you have the same problem with equipment stuff. When I'm troubleshooting equipment. Bottom up versus top down. Then you can have a person that's more social or less social. You know, that can be very variable. Well, a good example of getting more bottom-up thinking is United Airlines. Business Week magazine had an article, a cover article, with the cartoons of snarling flight attendants, and it was titled, United Striving to be Less Awful. And I fly on them all the time, and they were awful. But this new CEO that's just recovering from a heart transplant has improved them. And one of the things he did was to get out in the office and realize that they were booking planes too tight, that hiring the cheapest, awfulest ground ops contractor was a really bad idea. I could tell you that. Didn't have anywhere near enough staff to bring the... One of my flights waited 20 minutes for the guy to do this. They just didn't have enough staff. But he had to get out of the office and actually see that. They've gotten a whole lot better, putting more time in the schedule because he got out of the office, and I hope he recovers fully from his heart transplant. You know, that's a little more of an example of bottom-up thinking. Don't overgeneralize. We got to look at a lot of personality traits, sort of like a music mixing board. You can be more anxious or less anxious. It's not simple genetics. Things like autism, it isn't have it or you don't. It's a continuum of genetics. A music mixing board is a really, really good analogy for these complex traits that have a lot of genetic factors. I can be more visual or less visual. And then the big argument is, when does innate ability matter more than plasticity? Where I think innate, what you're born with, really matters, is on extreme ability, like maybe extreme math ability, musical ability, also extreme disability. I've got no working memory. And I think trying to improve that, let's just work around it with written stuff. Then in the middle, like let's say it'd be extreme ability here, extreme disability and something here, but then in the middle here, there is a lot of plasticity. But you can't get from one end of the mixing board to the other. That's just not going to happen. But you do have a lot of plasticity in here. So they both are important. Okay, what would happen to Einstein today? Quirky, temper tantrums. I have a letter that Einstein sent to the parent of an autistic child that I got about 30 years ago. It's a copy of a letter where he said he didn't talk until age 3. What would happen to him today? You know, where would he go today in today's education system? You know, it's brilliant. And I've run into a lot of kids labeled autistic that are brilliant. What about little Stevie, this weird loner? He brought snakes to school and he turned them loose. And then when he worked for Atari, he was a dirty, filthy slob. And if you've seen the HBO movie about me, there's a scene in there where my boss slams down the deodorant and says, "You stink, use it." And that movie was made right here in Weird Austin. That's where the movie was made. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of kids getting labels. I'm worried that a lot of smart, quirky kids, because that's another label I'm going to use, are getting screened out. Can't do algebra, so the girl isn't allowed to take biology. That's ridiculous. A lot of people that be super good out in the field kind of getting marginalized and screened out. Really concerns me. We need these people out in the field. All right, love this book. You can pick this up online by Betsy Morris on Dyslexic CEOs of Major Businesses. How about the man who started JetBlue at ADHD? So he did a great job working with all of the investors, selling it, getting it started. But he had to get someone better in operations so he wouldn't have another Kennedy Airport fiasco during a snowstorm. So this is an example of needing to have different kinds of minds. How about IKEA? Both ADHD and dyslexia. Yeah, it's doing really well, really good business. Steve Jobs was the artist who made the iPhone. Engineers had to make it work. You need the different minds. All right, now I'm going to show you why you need visual thinkers out there that maybe can't do algebra. And you need them to prevent a mess like the Fukushima nuclear power plant. This was an elementary visualization mistake. If I had been drawing the concrete work, doing the cross sections of the concrete, what they call the elevation drawings, I would have seen the mistake. This is located next to the sea. Yes, they did build a big seawall, but they had no backup for the seawall. And when the tsunami came over the top of the seawall, it immediately flooded the basement where the emergency cooling pump and the generators were. Simple watertight doors would have prevented it. This was strictly a visual thinking mistake. Now, I can't design a nuclear reactor, but all I know is if that pump doesn't work, I'm in so much trouble it isn't funny. And having worked in the meat industry, I've worked with a lot of pumps. And I've worked with great construction guys that have built Cargill plants and other heavy construction. You know, it would have been easy to have gotten water on the core. But the other mistake they made is they never asked for help. That was social. How could you let a nuclear power plant not only melt down, but do breach of containment and not call for help? It's a world emergency. You see, as an autistic person, I wouldn't care about the social. I would have picked up the horn and called. And the thing that's really disgusting about it, it would have been fairly easy to stop. They had stupid things going on, like metric and English fittings. Well, I'll tell you how to deal with that. You just weld them on each end of a pipe or on a flexible coupler, and that's how you make it work. You just got to get water on the core. And then you just get the gray hairs from the 60s, because this is a 60s era plant, get them out of retirement, because you got to know where to tap into the pipes, because I don't want the people I've worked with to glow in the dark. I'm very concerned today that kids are getting too far removed from the world of practical things. We got a lot of kids growing up today. They don't cook, they don't sew, and working with hands-on things, and that includes 3D printers. That gets tech back to the real world, because if you don't draw your thing right, it's going to collapse when it's being printed. There's a huge shortage today of skilled trades. Huge, huge shortage. And then farming, which is my field, the average age of people in farming and ranching is over 50s. And you know what? You can't eat computers and you can't eat iPhones. It's just that simple. And there I am doing hands-on things, horses. I did horses, electronics. I did a really cool 1960s electronics experiment. And what you do is you take a big speaker and you stretch a rubber membrane over it. Then you glue mirrors on it and you reflect the light off. Very cool way to make a light show in time with the music. The other thing about the hands-on activities, they were the only places where I was not bullied and teased when I was in school. Was refuges away. You got to get kids into specialized interests. Well, when I was in high school, I didn't do very much studying, but boy, I did a lot of carpentry work. But one of the things I was learning was working skills. And during my master's, I was painting this Himalayan monster sign for the Arizona State Fair Carnival. And how did I get that job? I showed off a portfolio of my work. But people do need teaching, because it was on this job that I learned for 3 years I was using the wrong brush. Because the brush that works looks like this floppy thing. When I saw it in the art store, I go, how could you use that thing? And then an old sign painter told me how to soak it in oil and shape it. Somebody has to teach you that, or I have to read it somewhere. There's no way I would have figured that out myself. Hands-on classes. They teach practical problem solving. Now here are some kind of places you can find information. 4-H small engine repair. Middle school is where you want to get kids hooked on engines. Then there's Makerspace, Hackerspace, Khan Academy. Forum's a magic word. When you take the word forum and you use it like computer forum, programming forum, art forum, theater forum, whatever your thing is, cooking forum, brings up really great web pages. And then you got to remember there's SketchUp. That's the free software for 3D drawing. And students asked me, how did I find my passion? I was exposed to it. I also want to show people that there's all kinds of free programs out there, free platforms to promote things. I don't know how many people realize that the Martian book and the hit movie started out as a computer programmer's blog. So he was just writing it as a serial. Then people kept asking him for copies of the book, and he got sick of sending them, so he put it on a 99-cent Kindle, and the rest's history. There's all kinds of portals online. Get work out there. There's where I started my career, building things. And I just started my career one project at a time. One thing I had to learn, because I was weird, is I had to get portfolio stuff out there. I wrote in Livestock publications. I showed clients drawings. I demonstrated cattle handling at feedlots. The other thing is, a lot of kids are afraid to walk through the door of opportunity because they don't have confidence. I heard a very sad story about a girl who got she was on the autism spectrum, a full scholarship to a major art school, and she was afraid to do it. And I think they're too afraid to make a mistake. And I think some of this goes back to not being involved with the world of practical things. I spent hours inventing little bird kites to fly behind my trike. I was like 7 when I was doing this. And I'd try a design that wouldn't work. I'd try another design. So when I had a chance to do my first big job, which was a dipping vat system for McElhaney Cattle Company, this is way back in the 70s, I said yes, but give me 3 weeks, because there was a lot of stuff I had to learn how to do. So give me 3 weeks. And when a contractor seeked me out to do design work for him, I said yes. I went through the door. Doors to opportunity only open for a second. You gotta walk through them. Yeah, there's Jim the contractor. We had great times on jobs, but boy, I had to get on the horn. Boy, and we called it the horn when I worked in construction. Most funnest part of my life, getting out there with the guys. I remember one time I'm doing a job in the early 90s, and we were in a really junky bar in Des Moines, Iowa. And they didn't have the best plant manager there yelling and screaming at us. And I said to them, guys, you know, it doesn't work. We've got afternoon shift break. That's going to be 2 hours to make the thing work. Well, we had to make it work. We did. And I had to learn how to do the drawings for doing the concrete forming work. Well, boy, did I have to get on the horn to get stuff from Texas A&M and from the USDA. And there's another one of my drawings. And what really turned me on is that Capital Land and Cattle Company, they actually built a working replica of one of my systems to use in the movie. It turned me on that my projects were shown. And there's the cattle coming up into the original facility built back in the 70s. You got to put a portfolio out there. There's all kinds of forums out there because we got to start thinking about what's the ultimate goal of education. We got to get people into good careers, and they've got to learn working skills and get them out doing stuff. And there's all kinds of platforms today that we can be using. And there's my brochure. And I can assure you, the hugging machine was brought up. I can assure you that was not on my cattle brochure. I think ranchers would have thought that was just too weird. All right, now, just going to finish up here because I want to have about 10 minutes for questions. Let's get a little respect for skilled trades. I've got 2 airplanes I got to go on this afternoon. And now my visual thinking is thinking on the airplanes. Now I'm imagining myself sitting on top of the airplane and absolute disaster happening when it takes off. Probably be killed. But you can see how complicated the jet engine is when you take the covers off. You know, somebody has to keep this going. I want it to work tonight so I can get to an ag sustainability conference up near Billings, Montana. A lot of people today are interested in where their food comes from, but they don't know. A lot of young people today may not do stuff on computers, but where does major stuff actually come from? I've been to China, seen the factories there. That's where a lot of things come from. A lot of students today are totally removed from ag. About 31% have never been on a farm. Now this is just crazy. 50% of young adults in England fail to connect pigs with bacon. I go, really? Yeah, I think we do need to get back to doing some hands-on things. And people are interested to learn on where the food comes from. And when I talk to farmers, You need to be getting on social media and talking directly to consumers. And then there's a great place outside of Chicago, Fair Oaks Dairy, great place for students to visit, big dairy, big commercial pig farm. And I asked them, what's the most common, really weird question you get asked? Are those actually pigs? And then I asked them, well, what demographic is asking this question? It wasn't just the young people. Older people were asking that too. I'm going, really? Are they Disney animatronic pigs? No, they are real pigs. I'm worried in today's society with all the social media and everything and apps of people getting worse into silos. There's an article I found last week that's called Measurement of Online Social Bubbles. And it shows that people are getting more and more just talking to like-minded people and not going across silos. I have even run into some young people that don't know what generalized Googling is. One girl thought she could get all her news off of dating apps. And then another person that I talked to, another survey that I looked at showed that about 25% of young people get all their news off of social media. That worries me. And what also worries me when I go on the airplane now, I don't see anybody reading the newspaper and looking at general news anymore. I'm worried about this lack of depth in reading. We got to work on chipping away at the silos. And I found this picture. Instead of just busting the silo down one bust, this hydraulic thing is nibbling away at it. Yeah, it's hard to take down silos, but we need to be doing that. And we need to take down the silo between the gifted student world and the autism world, because I go to both meetings. And I'm finding little nerdy gifted kids in a gifted conference going to a talk on social skills. And I sit through the talk on social skills and I go, oh man, it sounds like an autism meeting. But they're not communicating with each other, and there's almost no overlap in the books, even though they're the same kids. You got to show kids interesting things to get them interested in it. I got really interested in an optical illusion room because I saw it in a science movie. And my science teacher made me figure out for myself how to do it. That's one of my designs in SketchUp. Very, very cool. Program's free. Now, the thing I like about the 3D printing is it brings tech back to the real world. And I think it's interesting that MakerBot warns on their website that you do need patience, something a lot of kids don't have. And there are some of my books, and we got time for questions. The Autistic Brain is the book that has all of the science about the different kinds of thinking. Actually, I wish I had titled this book Different Kinds of Minds, but my editor wanted me to put the title Autistic Brain on it. But really, it's a book about different kinds of minds. And now, we've got some time for questions, but before we do that, we've just got to say one more time, keep Austin weird! Thank you. We've got some time for questions. Okay, the first question I got is, how can education policy and school district administrations be changed to support kids who learn and think differently? That's very, very general. I think we have to get a lot more specific. I'm really worried about the algebra requirement. I'm worried about that just totally screening kids out of biology, going and becoming a field biologist. You don't need algebra for that. And you don't need algebra for most skilled trade stuff. You need the 6th grade math. Any algebra you need, it's all on charts. I've got books full of charts at home for all the algebraic stuff for hydraulics and pneumatics. We got to start thinking a lot more about what's the end result of education. Stay out of trouble with the law and get and keep careers, really good careers. Okay, the next question, what do I think about inclusive education, special needs versus separate classrooms, inclusive versus separate classrooms? You know what? That's way overgeneralizing. Little kids, I want to try to be as inclusive as possible, but you sometimes have to do what's practical. What I don't want to see, and I saw this fall, is I saw a 12-year-old, a smart, fully verbal 12-year-old, just kind of mucking about on a laptop in a class with very severe, low-functioning kids, some of them that could barely walk. That I definitely don't want to see. What's the one thing schools can change to serve all kids? I think the first thing is realizing that there are different ways of thinking. Okay, let's see, the problem. Is the problem of lazy addictions to poorly intended video games or video games themselves? If a video game is designed to raise curiosity, can it be good? I would say in moderation, yes. But there are certain kids, and I would have been one of them, because I loved to watch cartoons when I was a kid, that would have become a video game addict. No, there's a point where you've got to get them off of that stuff. And different kids respond to things differently. I was just reading a New Yorker article last night about a school in Silicon Valley where they were doing everything with tech, and it seemed like for certain kids it was working great, and they were doing fabulous big projects. But for another kind of kid, it wasn't. And there's a certain kind of kid that's getting addicted to video games, especially the online multi-person ones and a lot of the shooting video games, and their outcomes are bad. I'm hearing from parents, he's 21, I can't get him out of the basement. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm against technology, but we need to be doing a lot more things where the technology is being used, along with the teacher. Are you comfortable presenting to these big groups? Well, when I first started in graduate school, I panicked and I walked out. You have to do it. And another thing is, make sure you have really good slides so when you freeze, maybe you can read your slides. And I would have really not liked it if my slides had not worked at all. I'm a strong advocate of game-based learning, teach game design. If these kids learned game design and went into the industry, I'd be fine with it. But that's not where most of these kids are going. In order to get into game design, they have to be introduced to programming. And the kids, most of these addicts are not even getting introduced to programming. That's part of the problem. Do I eat beef? Yes, I do. Definitely do. But I feel very strongly we've got to treat animals right. And when I see an animal welfare issue now at a meatpacking plant today, it's usually something I have to fix at the farm, like lameness, or the cattle really wild, or maybe half-dead, emaciated dairy cows, has to be fixed at the farm. I've done a lot of work in the meat industry. When I started out in the 70s and 80s, I thought I could fix everything with equipment. Oh, I found out that half my clients tore up stuff and wrecked it. Then, in 1999, I implemented the McDonald's audits. Now I had the power of the golden arches. And the first thing we had to do was make them fix all the broken stuff. It was management. Because what the McDonald's audits did is it forced them to manage the plants, fix broken things. That's the first thing we did. Lots of simple changes. And out of 75 plants, only 3 had to buy something expensive in order to get up to a good standard. People want the magic thing. It's the same thing in education. Oh, we're going to put iPads in all the schools. It's going to make it wonderful. Well, it didn't. People want the thing before they want the management. It took me over 10 years going into my career to learn that. Because my first professional organization was the American Society for Agricultural Engineers. I thought I could fix everything with engineering. What's the most common really weird question that I get asked? Oh, that's an interesting one. I'll have to think about that. How can we make adjustments in the classroom to help all children succeed regardless of how they think? All right, that's something where I'd like to start with some specific examples. First thing you have to do is realize that there are different kinds of thinking. I have had teachers say to me, how do I get the picture out of this kid's head? You don't. That's how that kid thinks. So let's present reading and math in different ways. I was a phonics learner, but I know other kids that were messed up shoving phonics down their throat. The end result is learning to read. That's the important thing. What do I think is the best way to incorporate technology? Well, I want to get hands-on stuff with it. Okay, we draw things with SketchUp, then let's print them out on the 3D printer. And if you don't draw it right, it will go into a pile of gook. That's bringing things back to the real world. Make sure there's a hands-on component there. Do you think mentors on the spectrum benefit autistic students? Yes, but I've talked to people that are on the spectrum that want to be mentors. And some of them are not far enough along. They haven't been in a real job yet. The most effective mentors, I'd like to get the gray hairs out of the picnic table at the meatpacking plant shop somewhere in the US and have them come in and be mentors. Or some old NASA space scientists that have told me, yeah, half the people at NASA are on the spectrum. Yeah, maybe there is a problem at Houston. I love that t-shirt. But get some of those people. How did they deal with the social problems? That would be the most valuable mentor, is somebody on the spectrum. I have another book called Different, Not Less. And it's 14 old Aspergers that were diagnosed in their 40s and 50s in good jobs. And the reason they got diagnosed is because their relationships were a mess. And that's where the diagnosis helped them. But on these fully verbal, milder kids, I think sometimes it's holding them back. I'm seeing some moms that can't let go. One mom didn't want to let her kid go to a church office 1 mile down the road to edit some video. My mother realized that she had to get me out in different places. How would I describe the term autism to a young child? Well, on the mild versions, it's socially awkward. Some of the social circuits aren't hooked up. So you've got to learn social skills like being in a foreign country. Like when I went to China, pointing like this is rude. You point like this. Somebody has to tell me. And then the Chinese person coming over here doesn't know that they're going to get in lots and lots of trouble at the airport if they push and shove on airplanes like they do in China. I couldn't believe the pushing and shoving on airplanes that they did. Why didn't you give up? Where does persistence come from? I had some good mentors. I had my mother. I had great teachers in elementary school. I had Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, a NASA space scientist who gave me interesting projects to do. And I had him when I was in my final years in high school, and I still worked with him on weekends when I was in college. Mentor teachers. And there were good people in the cattle industry. The people that put bull testicles on my car, that kind of bad, awful stuff, it was the cowboy foremans. It wasn't the owners of the feed yards. Owners of the feed yards actually were good to me. There were some very good people. And I want to tell you something that a cattle buyer at a Swift plant told me when there was a lot of trouble. Trouble is opportunity in work clothes. And I was just at another meeting where somebody from China said that the words for trouble and the words for opportunity were the same Chinese character. I go, that's real, real interesting. And to keep persevering. Our smiley face is mindless technology. I'm not saying don't use these things, but people need to learn how to talk on the phone because there's a lot of things where you can get it done a lot quicker on the horn. They need to learn how to use the horn. It's fine to do these other things. Online learning, yes, definitely a place for online learning. There's a lot of things you can do on that. Okay, let's see. So I got 1 minute left. Okay, how online teach the autistic learner. Yeah, there's a place for online learning. I talk to low-income folks, and I let them know all the free stuff there is online. But you've got to start looking at what the kid can do. Obviously, if somebody's in a wheelchair, they're not going to climb Mount Everest. But there's a lot of things that they can do. And we need to start looking at what can this kid become. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming. And keep Austin weird!